Before the landmark shifts of the 1970s, cannabis in the Netherlands existed in a state of total prohibition. During this era, the state cracked down on the use of even a few grams, and penalties for users were often quite severe. This strict criminalization did not stop the users and the trade. Instead, it forced users into an unregulated and high-risk illegal drugs trade. Without any professional oversight, the quality of the substance was left entirely to the black markets. One of the most dangerous consequences of this model was the emergence of contaminated drugs. The Dutch eventually realized that the social marginality and physical degradation accompanying addiction were often the direct consequences of the choice to prohibit these substances. This realization made way for policy of harm reduction and cannabis legalization. Prostitution was criminalized officially in the Netherlands from 1911 to 2000. Under this status quo, prostitution was a criminal activity and prostitutes were considered criminals. Due to this, the control that the government can impose upon the activities of both the prostitutes and the customers contributed to the potentially dangerous situations. For example, in case a prostitute would fall victim to sexual misconduct, she would have to seek out the authorities herself, as they would not patrol her area of work. Additionally, once she does come into contact with the police, she risks arrest herself, or at the very least dismissal, due to the lack of framework for her protection. Legalizing prostitution was seen as increasing the safety of the workers. Due to this legalization, the government takes the responsibility for the conditions experienced by prostitutes. This means they are entitled to protections against violence and abuse in their field of work and have the same rights as other workers. Some of the examples of policies in place are cameras in front of every window, alarm systems accessible at the press of a button, and free access to STD checks. Additionally, police, both in uniform or undercover, are often patrolling the area. In this case, the police is working to ensure the safety of the woman. The 2000s regulation had some other related goals, such as to combat coerced prostitutions, to protect minors in sex work, and to reduce the scale of prostitution by illegal foreign nationals, and to remove the ties between prostitutes and criminal activity. Secondly, the case of cannabis and prostitution's decriminalization by the Netherlands also brings us to Moore's concept of semi-autonomous social fields, with the creation of registered red light districts. These sectors are known to have their own cultures and norms and have rule-making capacities of their own despite belonging to a municipality. Their difficulty to regulate and prevalence in Dutch cities also inspired the government's decision to decriminalize cannabis use and prostitution, both of which are very common in these districts. However, the red light districts are still subject to Dutch law, for example, as shown by prostitutes' entitlement to protection under Dutch law in the case of sexual misconduct. Similarly, the evolution of the Dutch coffee shop illustrates the power of semi-autonomous social fields in shaping public health. These establishments are far more than retail outlets. They are specialized sectors that have developed their own strict internal cultures and norms, such as the Ahoy Gey rules, which govern behavior and ensure order independently of constant municipal policing. By moving the transaction from the volatility of the illicit street market into a regulated low-nuisance setting, the Netherlands achieved its primary goal, the separation of markets. This effectively shields the consumer from exposure to criminal subcultures and substances associated with unacceptable risks like heroin or cocaine. The product found in this environment is ultimately healthier for the consumer, as it is severed from the subcultures of harder drugs. In fact, only 14% of Dutch cannabis users can access other drugs through their source, compared to 52% in countries with strict prohibition. Like the red light districts, coffee shops exercise their own rule-making capacities to minimize victimization and conflict, yet they remain to the state's overarching mandate to prioritize the health, safety, and freedom of its citizens. However, it's not all positive. The autonomy of the social field is constantly tested by the external pressure of drug tourism. In urban hotspots and border regions, the ideal of a low-nuisance environment is constantly undermined by an influx of tourists who overconsume, bringing the transaction into public eye. This in turn creates further public nuisance, ranging from pushy behavior from the consumers to the various shady activities of illicit drug runners who target only non-residents. As a semi-autonomous social field, the coffee shop is often unable to tackle these issues through internal norms alone. When the tourists take too much, they trigger external state interventions, such as a residency requirement for the purchase of cannabis. While this intervention might seem helpful, it only creates a waterbed effect, where the curbing the shop's autonomy simply pushes the nuisance and illegal trade outside of the coffee shops. These external factors remind us that when a social field cannot contain the scale of its global draw, it starts to rely on the state to reclaim some control, often at the cost of the field's internal autonomy and with only partial success. Drawing from the theory of intersectionality, the practical issues caused by the decriminalization of prostitution and cannabis use highlight the need to keep working on intersectional solutions. Intersectionality has been defined as the ways in which aspects of identity intersect in shaping structural, political, and representational aspects of certain lived experiences. In this case, the issues of trafficking and child exploitation within prostitution establishments in the Netherlands show how decriminalization is not always going to be a fix-all solution. The identities of the individuals involved in these practices intersect in ways that may harm them despite of, or even because of their profession, even after legalization. Common counter-argument to the legalization of prostitution is the claim that prostitution fuels human trafficking, and that by legalizing prostitution, the Netherlands is actively contributing to human trafficking. Most victims of human trafficking in the Netherlands are used for forced prostitution or sexual exploitation, and around 20% of those victims are underage girls. Almost half of the child sexual abuse images reported to the Internet Watch Foundation in 2018 were hosted in the Netherlands. On top of this, some articles point out that legalization of prostitution has resulted in an expansion of the market, potentially also including the market for underage victims of sex trafficking. Those found at the intersection of being underage, foreign, and coerced into this profession are not served by this new legalization. Societal attitudes heavily affect the development of laws and policy. In order to effectively protect those currently falling through the cracks of the legal system, we must start by giving struggle a voice and discussing problems and solutions openly. Through sharing knowledge, educating, and critically evaluating both the situation on the ground and the value of the current laws and norms in place, we can take a step towards effective and meaningful legal reform. Even though the Dutch laws on drug use and prostitution have had positive effects, we should continue to question and discuss them so that they can be improved and to offer certainty and safety to those operating within semi-autonomous social fields and those affected by the intersection of multiple societal disadvantages.